All right, Baselode Energy. We have just completed our first drill program on the Catharsis project. I'm James Sykes, CEO, President, Director of Baselode Energy, here with Mr. Cameron McKay, VP Exploration. Cam, how do you feel about this drill program? What do you think about these 8 holes?
I think it's a very good start to what is a very large and very unexplored and prospective project. And we're excited with the results, and we're really looking forward to what's next at Catharsis.
Yeah, I think it was fantastic. It's never know what you're gonna get when you're that far outside of the basin. But I think we've really turned the page here, and we've seen a lot of interesting characteristics in the drill core that hopefully shed some light as to potential on the project as a whole. So for people who are not familiar, Catharsis, here we are, way down here, about 60 to 100 kilometers south of the Athabasca Basin. And this was the target area that we drilled. Cameron, can you provide a little bit more context as to what we're looking at and kind of the drill strategy here?
So the main background of this map is a magnetic tilt derivative map. So it basically just sharpens the contrast between magnetic highs and magnetic lows. It's good for looking at structures. And so you can see that there's sort of a flexure in the mag, and then overlain on top of that, there's these black lines. Those are conductor axes from an airborne EM survey. And so those highlight our graphitic structures, in this case, graphitic metapelites that are also in many cases shear zones as well. You have shear developed along these graphitic metapelites. And then there's this blue bubble overlain on top of all of that, and that's a gravity low anomaly. And so you can see that all of these geophysical layers intersect at this spot where we have this nice flexure and a break in the EM, and then so it's just overlapping geophysical anomalies that we like to see that have been useful in vectoring towards uranium deposits in the past. So it was a very high priority target area for us. And so you can see we poked 8 holes in it over a distance of about just over a kilometer, about 1,200 meters in strike length, I guess. And so that was the entirety of the drill program that we had, was just focused on this one initial target area.
Yeah, we had a video about this that I encourage anybody who hasn't seen that video to go watch our interpretation of what this area was going to be like, before it was drilled. Looked very interesting. Hole 3, right in the middle there, right where there are no EM conductors, was an interpretation of where an analog similar to Arrow, could have been NextGen's Arrow deposit, to be up front. We did not hit an Arrow with any of these holes, but I think that we did have quite a number of success with holes 5, 6, 7, 8 up in that northern area. And hole 1 has a very interesting feature that we'll dig into a little bit more. So we did have 5 out of 8 drill holes intersected elevated radioactivity. Cameron, can you provide a little bit more context regarding that?
Yeah, so the elevated radioactivity that we saw in all of the drill holes was at this lithologic contact between these basement orthogneiss complex. In this case, it was predominantly granodiorite gneiss with these Wollaston group metasediments on top. And so it's not uncommon to have some kicks at these spots, but it's also encouraging that there is sort of a radiometric anomaly at this important lithology contact, because that's traditionally been thought of as, and shown to be in many cases, an important fluid conduit for transporting uranium-bearing fluids in other known deposits. And then associated with that contact and then some of the other contacts and structures, we did see some relatively encouraging alteration. Nothing in this particular hole that sort of like blew our socks off, but it is nice to see that evidence of fluid moving along those lithology contacts and those structures.
Yeah, there's a number of deposits with that form right at that contact. We're very close to it, so seeing the elevated radioactivity there is definitely encouraging. So that was basically a schematic for all the holes that we have seen. Now, to put things into context, we take that radiometric downhole data, and we've got a certain way to analyze the results from each drill hole, including what we've drilled at Accio. So this isn't Catharsis. We've jumped back to Accio very quickly. And what's interesting, though, is that the radioactivity out of those 5 holes above a certain threshold is better than at least it is better than 8 of the drill holes that we see at Accio, which is and some of these drill holes are 50 to 100 meters away from mineralization at Accio. So it kind of makes you think that you could be near something and just you wouldn't know it unless you're right on top of it and drilling through it.
Yeah, it's just the way that these things work, especially if you're looking at what's potentially, a deeper basement system. Even the alteration halo around it is potentially going to be tighter, and the radioactivity. So it's just the way that it is.
Yeah, tight alteration. That's something to remember moving forward in this presentation. That alteration is definitely going to be tighter in the basement hosted system than you'd see in traditional unconformity with the sandstone, because everything just blows out in those targets. But these things are constrained. Let's have a look at hole 5. I love hole 5, to be honest. I thought that was a huge success right on its own right. And if anybody's looking at this map, you can see that we drilled hole 6 and hole 7 right in the same area. So it was definitely important for us. Hole 5. All right, what can we say about this, Cameron?
It definitely was our best altered hole. There's alteration, I won't say top to bottom, but I mean, definitely like we were coming in and out of, some alteration systems all the way through. Some good structures. The main feature that obviously pops out on this is actually in the foot wall of the metasedimentary orthogneiss contact. It does straddle it even a little bit more than this section shows. So like where you see that red hatching there, that's a quartz hematite breccia that's quite pervasive. And it actually does extend a significant distance further down and up, but it's slowly dissipating. So we didn't want to overhype it too much, but suffice it to say it is bigger than that. And then overlaid on top of that, you can see that sort of blue lozenge shaped polygon there. That's later stage fractures and clay alteration associated with that interval there. No radioactivity in this hole, but not necessarily the worst thing. I mean, we definitely see the fluids traveling through the rocks here. We can't say for certain that they're the right kind of fluids, but that definitely we have structural reactivation and fluid movement in this area.
And I think that's the big win. Like when we look at the scope of this thing from 125.3 down to 230 meters, that's a large alteration system with quartz and clay and localized bleaching, hematite. And there's sometimes it's quartz before hematite, sometimes it's hematite before quartz, and there's just multiple episodes of fluid movement all along the same fault system.
I mean, with all these things, like if you look at the core long enough, like there's a lot of cross-cutting relationships where you think you've got sort of the paragenesis, like what came first, second, third, nailed down, and then you can go look 100 meters down and you'll get a different story. But I mean, suffice it to say, there's numerous overlapping events.
And if we look at some of this, you can see maybe the uninitiated can't see it, but from our eyes, you can see hematite that's mobilized. So as if the hematite was there before, and then this later structure came in and moved the hematite yet again. So that's always a good sign to see when you're looking for uranium. You want to follow where that hematite goes, because that's hematite is typically the fluid system that will carry uranium to where it's going to get deposited. And even in here, you can see these very thick quartz veins. So it's not a little system where you get very thin quartz veinlets. These are thick quartz veins. They're brecciated style of quartz veins. It's a large system. And even in some of these, you can see some local alteration, local clay alteration near the quartz system, and even some localized bleaching. But this is a big system that has seen a number of different structural events, a number of different fluids moving along it. And as Cameron was mentioning about the timing events, so we've got 3 different pieces of core covering about 60 meters, 65 meters of this structural system, and there's different timing events in each of the pictures. So from 1, 2, and 3, depth wise, so left to right and then bottom. On the left hand side, quartz was the first event, because those are quartz clasts that are hosted within a matrix. Hematite was the first, potentially the first alteration event in the second picture. And then on the bottom, it was a chloride event. If you look at the second alteration and structures, in the first one, it's hematite. In the second one, it's quartz. So it's if those two fluid systems have reversed each other. And in the third one, it's also quartz. If you look at a third system that came through in the first one, it's a clay alteration, a green clay fracture alteration, follows the structures that cross-cut everything. It's a carbonate system in the second one. So carbonates are now in the system as well. And in the third picture, it is another quartz event that is different from the first one. You can even see clasts of the first one within the second quartz event. And then there's additional alteration in structure. Again, in the first picture, you're seeing even more clay, brecciated clay. So that's really brittle clay alteration. Definitely, you have it's been more than just ductile movement that you've seen on this. There's clear-cut evidence that these are brittle faults that are carrying fluids and alteration. And then we're seeing carbonates in the third picture too. So it's a number of systems at work here, just in this one fault zone. The importance of all of this, though, and this is as soon as I found out that we hit this, I got excited, because when I hear quartz hematite veining and quartz hematite breccia, my mind jumps at Arrow right away. And at Arrow, the right underneath the unconformity, as part of the whole structural system, we had that quartz hematite breccia. And you as you follow it down the system, you eventually get into mineralization. But the quartz hematite breccia was not mineralized itself. And if you look at another example, the UEX, or I guess UEC now, the Raven Horseshoe deposit, same idea. It's a quartz hematite breccia. That's the Dragon Lake fault. So on the image there, the plan map, the Dragon Lake fault is on the far right-hand side. It's not mineralized itself. But as you can see in the text there, that the belief is that this type of system was an important fluid conduit for mineralization. It's not mineralized itself, but these could have been the systems that could have carried uranium to where they get deposited.
Yeah, no, it's a good sign.
Oh, it's a great sign. I love it. And we've got some of those on hook too. We found some quartz hematite breccias boulder sampling. So I'd love to follow up some of those targets that are outside of Accio.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess sticking with hole 5 and the alteration. So that alteration profile starts at about 125 meters. When we look 5 meters above that, there's evidence of an early ductile ultramyelinite. And again, when I saw that picture, my mind just hopped at this image too. It looked very similar to the Key Lake fault. Key Lake fault in this case is altered, whereas ours is not. But you can see little loose signs of the same type of alteration happening in CT 2305.
Yeah, but I think a broader point too, just like sort of, it's one of these things where it's once a structure, always a structure, and so it's like we're looking at the really early ductile phase right here, but then it's been reutilized multiple times throughout geologic time, forming these more brittle structures that we see below, but they tend to layer on top of each other over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, very cool. And these are typically the deeper structures too that we want to find, those nice ultramyelinites. It's when you find those, yeah, you're in a structural zone, and structures are the only way to create the conduits for fluid movement in the Athabasca. Hole 8 was another whopper. Hole 8, 17 meters of clay and chloride alteration. There's also a lot of core loss. It's not the most visually appealing core, but you can see a lot of broken up core, which is what you want to see. There's a lot of core loss that you can see, but also there are numerous intervals of intense clay alteration, to which the geologist called squishy core. For me, I love hearing that term. I love hearing about massive clay alteration where you can put your finger through it, because I've seen that plentiful times.
Yes, no, I mean, anybody who works in uranium knows that, when you see when the drillers are unhappy because you got, bad ground and squishy core and lots of clay, that's usually when the geologists are happy. So yeah, we like to see these messed up rocks. So good signs.
Yeah, very good sign. And as we were talking about earlier, Cam, before we recorded this, if you take the alteration from hole 5, which is all basically hematite, oh, that's an oxidized system. If you look at all the core here, it's all clay and chlorite and graphite. That's a reduced system. So we've got two ends of a fluid system. We just haven't found the redox system yet.
Yeah, got to figure out where they meet.
Yeah, so if there is potential, if that hematite system was carrying uranium, then it's going to be deposited with at that redox front. So there's how far were these holes away?
Those were almost 400 meters.
400 meters away. That's a big distance. If you consider McArthur River Pod 2, its maximum dimension is 80 meters in one single direction. You could stick a very tight alteration halo around that, and our airborne system would not have picked it up. So I think, yeah, I think between these two holes, there's a very good reason to go back there and explore. All right, the note on the bottom, there's no elevated radioactivity in holes 8 and 5, and they were the two most altered drill holes. Cameron, do you have an interpretation on that? What could that mean?
Well, it could mean that, the oxidized fluid has scavenged the uranium and moved it somewhere else. Don't know for sure, but it's a nice hypothesis. That's what we hope.
Yeah, that would be cool. That would be incredible if we're seeing that combination of basement uranium mobilizing along these structures and incorporated with a basinal fluid that would have brought in uranium as well. But just seeing uranium, the possibility for uranium mobilization within these rocks, within these structures and alteration systems, that's encouraging in itself as well. Hole 1. So we're talking about basinal fluids. Let's have a look at hole 1. All right, here we are. The very top of the hole, right after the overburden. Box number 1 down to box number 5, or box number 3, basically, where that red line is at 48 meters. What did our drill crew call this? An assumed paleoweathering profile. What is, for the uninitiated, Cameron, what is the paleoweathering profile?
The paleoweathering profile is something that is most commonly associated with the basement rocks immediately below the Athabasca basin rocks in the basin proper. To the best of my knowledge, you do not see this type of paleoweathering profile outside of the Athabasca basin in similar geologic sequences. Now, I'm sure there are instances where you can develop a paleoweathering profile just from surface waters interacting with just being exposed to the bedrock. But this is typically something that's associated with the basin, and it's thought to be the combination of the rocks being exposed to the surface before the basin developed, and then also diagenetic fluids during the formation of the basin, and then further hydrothermal alteration with groundwater flows at the basin at the unconformity, and then also like the fluids proper associated with the formation of uranium deposits. But it's definitely something we associate with the basin. So it's not conclusive proof, but it's certainly a vector towards our hypothesis of the basin being larger at one point. When you combine we see here with the alteration and the structures that we pointed out in the previous holes, we like our theory of the basin being larger than its previous extent more and more with the results that we've got.
Yeah, and just looking at this core too, you're not seeing the same amount of structures as we did in the other core. You're not seeing these massive quartz veins or anything like that. There's really no structural indication in this core as to why it should be altered. And that, what I've seen in my career as well, this looks like a paleoweathering profile.
Yeah.
So typically the paleoweathering profile, textbook example there on the right-hand side, as Cameron mentioned, it develops underneath the unconformity. You typically get a small bleach zone right beneath the unconformity. Then you get a red and a red-green, and then the green zone. So you're oxidized on top and reduced on the bottom. Almost think of it like water tables and things like that. And even you see modern analogs in different environments, such as supergene enrichment in copper porphyry style deposits. But this again, this is a textbook example. Sometimes you can have the red zone on the very bottom. Sometimes you can have the red-green zone on the bottom. They mix and they match, and it's not always 1-to-1. But if we are seeing a paleoweathering profile, then this can be encouraging, and they can go quite deep. I've seen paleoweathering profiles as deep as 20 meters, as deep as 50 meters. Our on-site geologist said he's seen paleoweathering profiles go down to 200 meters. This is an example from the Dufferin Lake area, in which, yes, you're seeing paleoweathering go down to 200 meters, basically. So they can develop, and typically when you see them at these depths, at these 200-meter depths, they're following structures, because that would allow for these paleoweathering fluids to migrate down the structure and alter the rocks around them. So it's curious that if this is a paleoweathering profile, we don't know where we are on this. Maybe we're only seeing down to 20 meters. Maybe we're seeing the ends of a 200 meters paleoweathering profile. So let's take that example and just run with it a bit. If we can assume that the upper alteration that we see in hole 1 is a paleoweathering profile, and we saw the extents of it down to 200 meters. So just imagine that the sandstone was larger, it's over Catharsis, a 200-meter wide paleoweathering profile develops, and then throughout time, everything gets eroded and eroded and eroded and eroded. Well, that's kind of beneficial, because as we've been trying to push about Athabasca 2.0 and the whole Athabasca 2.0 concept, is that we want to find these basement hosted deposits that are near a surface. So if we take Arrow, for example, and if we assume that there was a paleoweathering profile on Arrow that went down to 200 meters, so similar to what we're saying at Catharsis. So underneath the unconformity, which is where that black line, the black arrow is pointing to, and the black line is the unconformity, and everything in the white is the bedrock. 200 meters of paleoweathering profile. If all of that gets removed, then you're that much closer. Your mineralization potential is that much closer to surface. So that's if hole 1 is a paleoweathering profile, that means the sandstone would have been very close to where we are. And with everything being eroded, again, this really makes Athabasca 2.0 work. Cam, is there any way that we can figure out if this is a legitimate paleoweathering profile?
I'll have to think on that, but it would be nice to know for sure one way or the other, because it is a nice thing for the proof of concept, but I can't say off the top of my head.
Yeah, if sandstone was out this far and we're close to the edge, or we're close to where it used to be, it has opened up the entire prospectivity of Catharsis. And then if we look at the structure that the geologist interpreted the structure that an alteration that we saw in hole 5. So that quartz vein system, that quartz hematite vein system, is a northwest southeast oriented system. If the unconformity is close to here, great. There's unconformity and near surface basement hosted potential. So let's throw that all into Catharsis as a whole, and just focusing on one part of Catharsis, not the entire project at the moment. The green circle, if you can find that green circle, is the target area that we were just drilling. And then if you use the magnetics to identify all of these different northwest, southeast structures, you can see that there's quite a lot of them. And if we just focus on the gravity alone, a gravity survey that we flew over this part of the project, and just outlining where gravity lows occur in conjunction with those northwest structures, you've got 14 different targets here, 15 different targets. This is a big project. 15 targets is, that's a lot of drill programs that are going to be required to really see this through. So instead of drilling 100 kilometers of conductors, we use this data to really expedite our drilling and try to maximize our investment return by making a discovery as quick as possible. So if these northwest structures are the ones that are, if they're the fluid conduits, then in conjunction with any of the lithological corridors, so the ones that are going northeast, southwest, or on the western side, you're seeing them go northwest, southeast, then these are great places to look.
Yeah, we're not factoring in the EM on this, but just knowing what I know, I can say with a high degree of confidence that at least half of those circles are also associated with EM anomalies. So there's a lot of overlaying geophysical anomalies to be tested.
And then we also have to consider the EM, the low EM signature, similar to what we see at Accio, because
Yeah.
Accio is not a classic EM target. There's
No.
barely any graphite in there.
Yeah. I'm skeptical that there's any.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And then as per our last video on Catharsis before we were drilling, we highlighted this triple R target area. And if you look at what's going on just southwest of where we drilled, you've got, now this is where we saw a lot of buildup of conductors in the area. We've also got a gravity low in the area. We've also got a northwest magnetic cross structure coming through the area. So the potential for this area is also very high. Moving forward, I guess we're still going to focus on the target areas that are closest to the road, just because they're that much easier to get access to it. And if we can make a discovery on any one of those, it just, life is easy after that, basically. Which, so far, so good on Catharsis. I think this drill program's been wonderful. 8 holes completed, 1,630 meters. We did focus on one target, which it was, I think that target has definitely made some interesting, but we made some interesting discoveries, and those discoveries are now turning into vectors, really, I would say. 5 drill holes intersected elevated radioactivity at key lithological contacts. So regarding holes 5 and 8, which had no elevated radioactivity, again, is the absence of elevated radioactivity in the alteration structure zone, are they important? Is this a sign that mobile uranium has moved to a new location? And if it has, that's how you start concentrating uranium at a potential redox front. So hopefully we can learn from the geochemistry once we get all of that back. I guess I'll also point out that we have sent some samples off from hole 5 within those quartz vein systems to Dr. Pan at the University of Saskatchewan, because he's got a unique way to look for quartz irradiation or quartz radiation damages along the edges of a quartz grain. So if there were any radioactive uranium or thorium bearing fluids that are moving through that system, the quartz should have recorded that, and hopefully that's what we'll find out with that extra quartz irradiation study. Hole 5, very long alteration system and structure zone. It's that quartz hematite veining breccia that we are seeing cut with later clay alteration. So all good signs that we want to see with exploring for uranium mineralization. There are definitely similarities with these quartz hematite breccias as with other uranium deposits, basement-hosted uranium deposits within the Athabasca, and that they're fluid conduits, not necessarily mineralized, and not the trap itself. But if these are the type of systems that are mobilizing uranium through them, then we've got a good shot in this area alone. Hole 8 had 17 meters of squishy clay, chloride alteration, and core loss. And similar to what you see in basement rocks, that's the type of alteration that you want to see. A number of unconformity and basement-hosted uranium deposits have this type of alteration associated with them. Hole 1, if that upper alteration is a paleoweathering profile, that really opens up the entire door for Catharsis. And it means that the unconformity was very close to our bedrock contact. I guess if you think about what some of the original ideas about being this far out in the basin, and why a lot of people never really gave it a lot of thought, is that they figured that being this far away from the current basin edge, we'd be what, 500 meters deep, a kilometer deep from where the unconformity could have been. That's based on a standard slope of the the unconformity at its location. But again, if we're proving that the standard slope is not a standard and that everything kind of becomes horizontal for where the unconformity was, really opens up a lot of catharsis, not even just catharsis, but it creates a whole new exploration dimension for the Athabasca as a whole. And if we can find an open pit uranium deposit on Catharsis, well, that's the best of the best. If these northwest southeast structural controls, if they are fluid conduits and do have uranium fluids moving along them, then we've got 13 drill ready targets just based on gravity alone. That's not considering EM or drill targets defined with EM or magnetics as well. That's just simply looking at gravity. So there's a lot to do at Catharsis. It's definitely a multi-year exploration project, and it's a project that we want to keep hammering away on. Cam, any concluding thoughts?
No, I think we hit all the highs. Yeah, I think again, like I guess maybe one concluding thought that I'll reiterate is I really think the success of this is more a proof of concept. Like we had a big picture idea that was outside the box, and we seem to have found some supporting evidence for it. So I think that's the big takeaway.
Yeah. Next takeaway is to find some uranium.
Yep.
All right, Baselode Energy. We are part of the OR group of channel or group of companies. You can follow a lot of the companies on YouTube. A lot of great videos out there. A lot of exciting news coming out from all of those companies as well. So keep an eye out. If you're, if you want to learn more about geology, I would highly recommend following the OR group's YouTube channel. Thank you very much, Cameron. Thanks for joining the call. And thank you all for watching this. I hope you appreciate what we've presented, and I hope you really get an idea of the results that are coming out of Catharsis. Even though there wasn't any mineralization, what we're seeing in the core is encouraging that that uranium systems could exist on Catharsis, and that's a big win, because up to this point it was an idea. But now, as Cameron mentioned, this is proof of concept in the making. That opens up a big window for us, and let's keep our fingers crossed that even going back to this target or looking at some of the other targets, we've got uranium in the works. Thank you very much for watching.